Okay, I think we're having a good number show up, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's 6:03. Again, this session is being recorded, so we can put it up on respective websites. So let me go ahead. I'll go ahead and call this joint meeting of NPU-G and NPU-J Zoning Committee meeting to order. Ms. Reynolds from NPU-G, anything you'd like to say?
Oh, thank you, Ben. I just wanted to say good evening to everyone. And since we are a joint connected NPU, I just thought it would be great if we all could come together. And since we have the same concerns and just work together on this effort here. And I want to thank Ms. Reed for coming back with us because she came to NPU-G and J, and so, but to connect with her because there was some concerns from residents. And so I made that decision for us as connected NPUs to join this meeting this evening. Thank you all for being here.
So I guess what we can do, the point of this meeting was to discuss the text amendment to the Comprehensive Development Plan. It was the legislation 20-0-1501, CDP-20-024, which was an ordinance to adopt the Atlanta BeltLine Subarea 9 and 10 master plans. That we wanted to have some time to do a further deep dive into how this would impact the property around, immediately around the proposed beltline, and any other information or concerns that we could take this offline from the general body meetings and actually have a further discussion about that. So I guess Ms. Reed, anything you want to discuss? Do you want to, I gave you presenting rights if you want to share anything that you brought to the table, any presentation materials?
Sure. Well, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, because I see my name popping up on different squares. I'm like, why am I popping up so many times? I'm not really sure what's going on. One, just thanking everybody for their time. I know that these are interesting times that we're living in. And so I definitely appreciate everyone's time and the opportunity to have a deeper dive conversation. Would it help Ms. Reynolds and Ben to go back over the presentation that I did and start from there to give some context and kind of get us all on the same?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just refresh everybody's memory on exactly what this is. Exactly.
Sure. And I've also asked, I know there were a series of important housing questions that came out of that. And I asked our housing colleague who is a part of the housing team to provide a slide, couple of slides explaining what we're doing related to housing. And so I think that would be helpful as well. And I'll have him kind of share that as well. So I'll start from the top. Let me share my screen. It says host disable participants.
Let me make sure. All right. You know what? I granted you the wrong. You're right. Your name is multiple times. Here we go.
I'm sorry.
Now you should. Yeah. Now you should be able to do it.
All right.
Okay.
Let me find it. Okay. Hold on. And let's see. Okay, maybe I have too many things open. Let me close a couple of things that may help. One second. Okay. All right, so let me kind of start from like the very beginning. The sub-area plans, when the Beltline was originated, or the idea of the Beltline back in 2005, 2006, shortly thereafter, neighborhood plans were done around the Beltline. So if there's 22 miles around what's deemed the Beltline, there were 10 sub-area master plans. And those plans looked at land use, mobility, office, mobility, public art, open space, That was the idea, was transit oriented development. That was the scheme, also to identify what were important to the community, those kind of things. Those plans now are 10 years old, right? A lot has happened in 10 years. So about in late 2000, maybe 18 or so, we started the effort to update the master plans to really look at where we are now and how we move forward. So how do master plans serve? They serve as a tool to guide future development. And so again, I've kind of talked about some of this. It was 10 years ago. We didn't start from scratch. A lot of the recommendations were still applicable. Some of them, they needed to be refreshed as it relates to land use. And so we kind of walked through that effort through a series of public meetings, et cetera. So I thought this was important to show because I think there's times when it's not clear what our boundaries are, right? And so this gray line, if you will, this gray band around the Beltline is what we call the Beltline planning area. That's where we have the ability to make recommendations a half mile on either side of the corridor. The red area inside is called the Tax Allocation District, and that's where we are able to spend the money that we collect from the TAD in those red areas, right? So this kind of giving you some context of what our band of influences in terms of planning boundary and as it relates to the Tax Allocation District. So again, we did 9 and 10 together, and I'm glad we're actually having this conversation together as well, because we said they share important boundaries. So we did them together. Again, we looked at land use, where are appropriate uses. And it doesn't get super specifics as it should be a Walgreens. It'll just say retail or commercial or mixed use, et cetera. We looked at mobility. How do people get around? Whether that's as a pedestrian, a cyclist, or as cars, and how do we improve that circulation? Open space. In this particular case of the West Side Park, the city is responsible for West Side Park. So a lot of the recommendations that came out of this plan were really about connecting to it, making sure that there were systems in place as that park was implemented and came online. Historic preservation, and it looks really more so at the preserving what's there, adaptive reuse of buildings, and that is a way to kind of preserve the character of communities, et cetera. Also adaptive reuses, buildings tend to be a little less expensive than a typical rebuild. Affordable housing was important. We knew that going into this next round, we need to really look harder and closer at equity and inclusion. And so the plan makes those recommendations as it relates to that in arts and culture. And so how do these plans operate? Like what are they role? What is the role? And I think someone asked, that was a really good question in the last meeting, like what do these plans do? So I do want to speak a little bit about how they're used. So when these plans get adopted, they become a part of the city's comprehensive development plan. And so they're used a couple of ways. So when a project is being rezoned, the city goes to the comprehensive development plan first to see, is it consistent with the uses that we've identified for that specific area? That's their high level. And then they'll also take into consideration the neighborhood plans as well. That's one way. We've seen these plans used for low income tax credits when an applicant is going to get low income tax credits. If it's identified in the plan that there is a special need or vulnerable population, having that codified in the plan helps them get extra points as they pursue low income tax credit with Department of Community Affairs. A lot of times if things are in the plan, it helps get grants. That was how we were able to get the West Side Trail extension that helped, that it was in a plan that was adopted. So it can be used to get grants that are needed, et cetera, if it's an adopted plan. So those are just kind of one of the ways. And it's also used as a vision tool. So and this is probably the most important, when a lot of different people use the plan. So the city will use it, we will use it, but the neighborhoods use it too. So it's a tool for neighborhoods to use too as development comes or things need to be preserved. Look, this is in our plan. That's why there's so many neighborhood plans throughout the city. And Atlanta is known, we are known for studying areas almost to death, honestly. And so there are a lot of studies out there, but sometimes studies get done and they just sit on the shelf, right? And so the idea in updating this, one is to refresh it, to reflect what's going on right now, to identify the important needs as it relates to implications of involuntary displacement, affordability. We know that's happening citywide in a lot of metropolitan cities, but specifically home in Atlanta, it's happened in places along the Beltline and other places around the city. And so addressing those and really giving some additional recommendations to our larger housing effort. And so the idea is that all these different sub-area master plans are making a lot of different recommendations in a lot of areas. And the idea is to roll that up to the respective departments. As the planner for the city, for the Beltline, and I've been in that role probably for the last maybe 4 or so years, the difference is that from a neighborhood plan like an NPU-G plan, the citizens have to kind of mandate that this is still important. And in this case, the citizens rally around that as well, but I also too help to champion that. So I want to kind of give the context of how master plans are used and why they are important. They set the vision for the next 10 or so years. They should be updated regularly to reflect what's going on, to reflect the desires, to reflect what should be preserved, all of those elements. And so I'll walk through some of the areas. And so for NPU-G specifically, this is Johnson Road. This is your area over in here. I will say that a lot of this is single family. And if you remember in the chart that I showed a moment ago, this is the single family is outside of the tax allocation district. So from a land use perspective, we're not making any recommendations to change anything from single family. Single family stays as it is. From a land use perspective, we liked to encourage mixed use at certain strategic corridors, in this case around Bankhead, Donnelly Hollow, Bankhead Martin Station, along Marietta Boulevard, and in some of the industrial areas along Joseph Lee Lowry and the Howell Park Night Station area. And so land use is one element. Then we also looked at mobility, again, how people get around and connect. What we wanted to make sure is that these recommendations align with the city's Renew Atlanta plans and some of the plans that they already had in place, so there's more alignment. I think the challenge sometimes with master plans in general, whether it's a master plan or a neighborhood plan, and those terms are used interchangeably, they still mean the same thing, is that they can get very aspirational. And so you want to make sure that there's some ability for them to actually be implemented. And so from a mobility standpoint, we wanted to make sure they really aligned as well. And so again, in this area, it remains single family. Obviously, Westside Park is in process. There's an engagement that the city has been doing related to that. The adoption of this plan doesn't impact the moratorium that's in place. The city has a strategy or cure. Most moratoriums have a cure that comes out of it, and that's a way to address concerns as it relates to equity and development. And I know that that was extended. And when we all should be hearing that information in the next couple of months when that moratorium expires. And then for sub-area 10, the northern boundary is Donnelly Hollowell, and it goes all the way south to I-20. And again, majority single family. So you notice that there's a lot of recommendations that from land use perspective that are right in around Maddox Park and in the Beltline area. A lot of this is shown as mixed use anyway on the city's plans right now. So this is just to kind of realign with those and make some suggestions. Now, this plan, again, is being adopted for information. We're not doing any proactive rezonings as a part of it. There are some plans that get adopted that you may be familiar with where there's a lot of rezonings attached to it. It's been my experience and our perspective that that you really want to, how do I want to say this? It's really important to, zoning gives communities a certain amount of leverage to negotiate with developers and stuff. And so it's important that when certain projects come along that there's still that opportunity to do it. I think proactive rezoning works well if you're trying to eliminate certain uses. You don't want to see junkyards or a certain particular use, and proactive rezoning makes, you know, in my opinion, makes sense. But there's a lot of instances where it does. For the Atlanta BeltLine sake, there's no proactive rezoning. What the plan does do though is it makes recommendations if certain parcels were ever to rezone, hey, this is a zoning category you should consider. And again, this is a tool then that the plan becomes the plan then becomes a tool that the community can use. And so again, mixed use, again, right on the northern side of Boone, As you transition to south of that, it's all single family. And that's really, all of this is in the tab, which I showed earlier a few moments ago. And so this is the high level recommendations, right? And so I talked a little bit about the land use and mobility and how people get around and connect. And I'll just go through some of the high levels because I know that a lot of the questions really centered around housing. And while this may not be specifically the housing strategy for the Beltline, because there's a larger effort that our housing team is involved in with the One Atlanta effort and the housing team and all the work that they have to do. We know that this is important, and that's why we had one, recommendations coming out of this plan so we can roll up to that larger effort, but then two, so that we could provide this 101 tonight to kind of go through some of the questions that we had the last time. So some of the recommendations that came out of this plan that were really important that we heard was neighborhood stabilization plan. And some of this is in the works, hasn't been finalized kind of thing, but it was noted that this was important to make sure that homeowners in particular, as it relates to taxes, have some resources to offset that. There's a ton of resources on our website. In our last conversation, I wasn't able to bring those up, so I do apologize for that, but there are some resources available to connect homeowners to whether it's emergency mortgage assistance, but then education around tax exemptions, et cetera, because the goal is that legacy residents have the resources and the ability to stay. So that was an important one. Mobility is kind of self-explanatory. I mean, there weren't a whole bunch of questions about that in the 2 NPU meetings, but I'll go through that anyway. We heard a lot about bicycle and pedestrian facilities, adding major sidewalks to corridors, that a lot of this is super residential in certain areas, so there are not a lot of sidewalks. And it was important for us to make sure that we made sure that the plan reflected that. We know that that's out of our realm of responsibility, but we know that the city is doing a citywide sidewalk assessment, and it was important to, when those conversations begin to start, or whenever there's engagement around that there's a plan that reflects the need for those. Intersection improvements around some of the major corridors, whether Lowry was a big one, in and on West Marietta Street as well. Housing, a lot of the recommendations, some of the things that we heard, and is mixed income. I think it was very clear in some of the conversations that we had is that needs to be more specific and speak to 30% to 60% of area median income. And Rodney's going to talk a little bit about what that means, because we know that could be planner jargon. More a mix of owner occupied and rental. We know that there is a large renters, a large population of renters. And so balancing those out, but then also having services to support renters. And we know that can be challenging, specifically in Georgia, because we don't have rent control, but exploring what those resources are to support renters. Some missing middle. I think at the time when we did this, the missing middle, the mixed MRMU district in the city hadn't been approved yet. So it was really just making sure that there's opportunities to use units from 2 to 12 units in one structure, that those could be missing middle affordable units. We heard a lot about increasing housing for seniors. There's a lot of seniors who want to age in place. And we see a lot of that happening, senior housing happening on the southwest side or the southern side, but not as much on the west. And, really purchasing land for affordability, that's something that the Beltline has a strategy around and has been doing more of to help reach the numbers of the 5,600 units. But more importantly about that is that when you own the land as a public entity, you have the ability to, one, determine the affordability, and then two, the duration of the affordability. So it's not just affordable for 10 years, you can make it affordable for 20 years or in perpetuity, that you have more flexibility in those cases. So really some more strategies around that and activating public land, that whether it's owned by whatever the entity is, so that available land can be more activated for affordable housing. And then also more education around housing issues in general. Our sister organization is the Beltline Partnership. And so we're the execution side of it. Our partnership The Beltline Partnership is our nonprofit. And so they're able to do fundraising that has to get funding that's unrestricted. Tax Allocation District funding tends to be focused or is focused just on the Tax Allocation District, but through the nonprofit side of the Atlanta Beltline, we're able to have a larger reach. And so they've done a lot of stuff around home empowerment, education seminars, how to appeal your taxes, how to make sure you're taking care of all your tax exemptions, how to renters' rights. There's been several with legal aid that we have collaborations with, and a lot of this is sponsored and partners that we have with Bank of America and Wells Fargo to help get that education out, and that's an ongoing series. They have one coming up about how to fix your home on a lower budget and how to tackle that and what some resources are available to do that. So that's our partnership side, and that's how they help to kind of balance, if you will, the funding needs. So they go after philanthropic dollars, et cetera. So that's the Beltline master plan, the role it serves, why it's necessary, why plans should be updated every 5 to 10 years, whether it's our plan or your plan or whoever's plan, because they need to reflect what's going on currently, and they can be used a lot of different ways. By the neighborhood, by the city, by ABI, and then when people as in developers are coming to the city, they want to know what's the vision. And so they'll go to various neighborhood plans to see that vision. And so with that, that's that kind of in a bucket. But there were a lot of housing questions the last time, and I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity for Rodney to kind of share what the ABI's efforts are or what's happening as relates to affordable housing and how we try to reach that goal. Rodney?
Yep. All right. So good evening, everybody. I wanted in this slide to really sort of level set and ensure that we're all sort of speaking the same language. I think I've often joked that my mom loves me, but she has no idea what I do. And if she does, and I know she loves me and I know she cares, but she has no clue what I do. So if I can explain it to her and she can understand it, then I'm hopeful that I can explain it to anyone. So one of the things about affordable housing is just the language. It's pretty, sometimes it can be complex. We are talking about, we think we're using the same words, but we're talking about different things. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with some of these definitions that we use in affordable housing. And first of all, affordable housing, what does that even mean? And really, some of the terms, if you look, I've already inverted it. So housing affordability, affordable housing, we kind of use those interchangeably. But really what we're talking about is quite simply no family, regardless of what their income is, should be spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And if they are doing so, that is unaffordable, no matter what their income is. And so you start from there. And you understand that if families, and we know families in Atlanta, families all over the city, but particularly around the Beltline, are spending way more than 30% of their income. AMI, area median income, that's another word that is thrown about, and it's important to understand what it is and how it's measured, but also how it's used. So it is the measure of an area's median income, or what half of the population above and below make. And that is a calculation that HUD, which is the federal government, Department of Housing and Urban Development, that is the metric that they use to administer all of their federal funds and their programs. So that's the reason why you'll see a lot of people using that metric as opposed to anything else, because that's what the primary funding uses. And so Invest Atlanta uses that metric, the city of Atlanta uses that metric, housing providers use that to gauge what income limits for a lot of the programs that we administer. What I've tried to provide to the right is a depiction, a chart of exactly what Atlanta's median family income is. And right now it's gone up. So it's $82,700 for a family of four, which is way above what a lot of folks in the city make. And so a lot of our programs target lower income limits than that limit. So I've highlighted a family of four. So folks making folks making 80% of area median income, which you often hear. That's a family of four making about 66,000. But that lower, right above that is the mark that's 30% of area median income, and that's about $26,000 a year, which is right at or above what a lot of our families in our most vulnerable neighborhoods make. I also try to include right above that a chart that basically breaks down what it means for families making certain incomes for what an affordable rent would be. So if you're making between 20 and 30,000, what's affordable to you is a rent of $750. And we know that's kind of hard to come by these days. And so we want to make sure that we make that apparent. The third definition is what you may or may not have heard before, but that's naturally occurring with sorry about that, affordable housing. And that's housing that's affordable, but that is not publicly subsidized. So there's no public dollars. It just is the market over in some neighborhoods, particularly in the Southwest and even on the West Side, have older housing stock that may have been built in the 60s, the 70s, lacks amenities, but the rents are pretty low, $750 to $800. And then the last definition that I want to make sure that we all understand is publicly assisted rental housing. This is what most people think about when they think about affordable housing. So that could be housing vouchers. That could be if the Invest Atlanta or Atlanta Housing or the city has provided funds directly to a project or a development. Those are publicly assisted rental housing, right? So I wanted to be clear, and I've provided a picture of a recent development called Adair Court that was funded by housing dollars, both from the Atlanta Inclusionary Zoning and LIHTC, which is another, I should have put that on there. That's the low income housing tax credits. So those are the ways in which housing developments are funded. I think that it's important to note what Lynette had said before when she showed the map. That map is important because our dollars, the dollars that we use, Atlanta BeltLine uses, are restricted to the TAD, the Tax Allocation District. Funding for housing outside of the TAD, we are not allowed, we don't have a funding source to fund those types of developments outside of that TAD. And so what we do is we work with partners to ensure that those those projects get funded, or we work through policy. So if you go to the next slide, this is the way in which my department at Atlanta BeltLine tries to reach the goal of 5,600 affordable units. And that number came from 2005, 2006, when the BeltLine was being codified. And they imagined that because of the population growth that the city would experience, that there would need to be built about 28,000 units around the BeltLine. And 20% of those units should be affordable. So that's where that magical 5,600 units comes from. So how do we get there? There's various ways that we can get there. One of those ways is policy. Policy meaning inclusionary zoning. Policy meaning the city passed in 2016 that any developer coming into the city and using public dollars, tax abatements or the like, or from a development authority, must set aside affordable units in their development. That the same goes for any developer who is building 10 or more units in the BeltLine subarea and parts of the West Side. That's without our money. So no money from the public sector is being used, no ABI money. If you're just building on your own, we still want affordability. So that's the way we support affordable housing through our policy. Programs, we partner with folks like Atlanta Volunteer Legal Foundation, like the United Way, like the city, like Invest Atlanta, to create and design implementation of anti-displacement strategies, rental assistance programs, those sort of things, so that we can stave off displacement and address those concerns. We also look to preserve units. So sometimes you can actually create units, but other times it's much more cost effective to save the units that already exist, to make sure that those units that already exist that don't have a time horizon of new construction, like 2 years for a new unit to come, there are units that are already affordable that we make sure we don't lose them. The other thing that Lynette actually mentioned was acquisition and direct development. So sometimes we can acquire the properties on our own, like Murphy Crossing, and hold those properties and ensure that affordability is permanent. The only way that you can do that is if you own the land. And so we have that as a strategy. And the other two on opposite sides of this funnel are pretty much, those are our dollars. So we've got dollars that come out of the trust fund, and we have dollars that come out of the tax allocation district increment. Those are dollars in excess of the debt service that we can use to fund affordable housing. Next slide. And oh, that's
you want to
okay.
You want to talk to where we are, that number? Is that helpful?
Yeah, so right now we're just over 2,000 affordable units that have been created, about 2,100 units. We do have a ways to go, but we've got almost 1,000 units in the pipeline right now that over the course of the next couple of years will be coming online. Again, that is in conjunction with our partners, Invest Atlanta, the City of Atlanta, Atlanta Housing. And so I want to reiterate that a lot of times when neighborhoods talk about reaching folks at the lowest incomes or most vulnerable populations, we utilize our partners for that, particularly Atlanta Housing, who that's their target audience. But we want to make sure that it's understood that we create affordable housing by ensuring that folks have other housing options. So if they do have more income, they're not competing with people with lower income, because we know if there's a competition for housing, the person with the most income is going to win. So we want to make sure we have enough units for a lot of different incomes so that they don't fight for the same units. And I think that's it for me, and I'm open to any questions anybody has.
Yeah, we do have on the line with us too, Kara Cooper, who's with Economic Development, because I know there were a couple of questions about economic development, and Beth McMillan, who's also with our, she's our over community engagement and planning, also a native of Atlanta, and has been with the BeltLine a while, so that's a really good historical context. And so just wanted to share that kind of to get us all on the same page, and then, you know, talk about questions and how to, you know, address some of the concerns more specifically if they have not already been addressed in the plan.
This is Ben. I guess let me ask, there's a couple of questions I've received in chat.
Okay.
I guess first, you talk about the affordable housing units. Is there an idea on what affordable housing units would look like specifically in our sub area 9 and 10? Do you break them down with goals per each sub area?
We don't have a number broken down per sub area. We looking at the entire BeltLine, quite frankly. We do have a, maybe like a year, maybe 2 years ago, we have a new, our first inclusionary, our first equity and inclusion officer. And so we're doing some things with ARC, with the Neighborhood Nexus, to do a deeper dive in identifying this vulnerable populations to better target resources. So it'll be more of that, but we don't have a unit goal for each sub area.
Have you seen any of the other neighborhoods in the other parts of Atlanta that already went through the BeltLine create their own goals within their neighborhoods or NPUs?
You mean as it relates to housing?
Yes, for the affordable housing.
Right. So all of the plans, the ones that we've done so far, so we started, we did 6 at one time. I probably wouldn't recommend doing that again. So we did sub areas 9 and 10, sub areas 1, which is West End, sub areas 2 and 3, and sub areas 5. 9 and 10 is the first out of the gate in terms of adoption. They all may they've all made housing recommendations and they're all very different, right? And so our goal, and that's why we said, while they may be very different, our objective is to roll those up into a menu for our larger housing effort. So some got really specific with, depending on the area, like in sub-area 2, which is around Peoplestown, the Housing Justice League is kind of centered there. So they gave some different recommendations that we were able to incorporate into the plan. So this is definitely an opportunity if you feel like, you know what, these plans, these recommendations are fine, but they're a little generic. We'd like to get a little bit more specific. There is an opportunity to make them more specific, with the understanding that ultimately our housing and the One Atlanta team will be implementing them, will be implementing the larger housing strategy. But our goal was to have a third-party consultant come in and hear and validate what we've been hearing from the community to come up with some recommendations. And so if there's an opportunity to fine tune them, we're happy to do that with you.
Another question we had is, how are current businesses going to be affected by this particular plan? Like, is there, any particular businesses, how they might be impacted, and what opportunities there are with the Beltline to help support existing business?
Sure. Kara, do you want to speak to some of the things that are going on with businesses in that area?
Absolutely. So, hey, and I'll turn on my video. I'm so glad to be here with you guys tonight. Invest Atlanta is the economic development organization for the city. And so they have a pretty robust existing business division. And then what we do at the economic development team as part of ABI is we really try to identify the gaps. And so a big part of what we've tried to do over the past 2 years is just build a stronger relationship. There's about 6,000 businesses around the planning area that Lynette showed earlier, about a half a mile to each side of the Beltline. So we've really been trying to go door to door to the businesses, create better email communications. We've been hosting quarterly business breakfasts to connect Beltline businesses to resources. And as you can imagine, I mean, the bulk of our outreach really is south of I-20, but also on the west side, because, a lot of our neighborhoods on the west side are under-resourced. And so we really want to come into that gap, find out what they need, and connect them to the right resource providers. So those are some of the things that we've really been focused on. We also piloted a facade improvement program with 2 businesses in 2019, and we'll be putting that application out in the coming weeks. And the scoring criteria for that program really targets businesses in our most distressed business corridors. So that'll be something that we'll be promoting in the coming months to just help provide additional assistance. And then with COVID, I mean, as you all know, all of our small businesses are in a lot of turmoil. And so we have been maintaining a resource guide and really trying to increase our email communications with businesses, and any business that reaches out, have a virtual one-on-one over the phone, just to help them know about all the resources that they have available as a Beltline business or City of Atlanta business in general.
Okay, great. We have a hand raised, L.A. Williams.
Hi. So my question is, when you say that the Beltline is going to grant incentives for the NPU-J and NPU-G, what exactly does that mean? What is the additional assistance?
Were you talking about housing, or were you talking about?
In general, because it didn't seem like she specified completely what that meant. So I just wanted to know exactly what it was, the additional assistance and or the extra incentives for people in the area. I just want to know what that exactly means from the Beltline's point of view.
Are you speaking about the economic development assistance?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. So again, we don't have any incentive programs other than the facade grant program that I just mentioned. And as Lynette spoke earlier, that is only for businesses located in our tax allocation district, because that is the only geography that we can spend our dollars. However, Invest Atlanta, as I mentioned, is our partner, and they have a lot of additional programs in other geographies around the city, as well as there are resources through the Small Business Development Center, the Small Business Administration Georgia District Office. Invest Atlanta has some of the most competitive small business loans as far as the interest rates. And so again, we really just try to talk with businesses one-on-one, hear what their growth strategy is or what their issues are that they're dealing with, and then pair them with the right resource provider. So it is more technical assistance, or pairing them with the right capital resource provider. So again, our main program that we have right now is the Facade Improvement Program for businesses in the tax allocation district.
And if it would
Okay.
be helpful, we can send a link to where this stuff lives so you don't have to search for it. I know that Invest Atlanta recently had a resurgence program or something to help small businesses.
Closed on Monday.
It closed on Monday. Okay.
But we have a resource guide where we're following national corporations that are doing small business grants. There's still a lot of opportunities on there. So I'll share that information with Lynette to get back out to anyone.
We'll send it to Ms. Reynolds and to Kiona so that they
Real
can
quick,
distribute it to them.
I wanna jump in real quick. Kara, you were mentioning Bank of America does do like business loans and they help the area grow. And I'm actually a business banker for Bank of America, so we do have some really awesome promotions going on right now. I do work over in Decatur, and I'm helping businesses right now maximize what they're currently doing, as well as securing the loans for things like owner-occupied real estate. So if anyone here knows of a business that thinks with us or is needing help and assistance, our lending division has just recently opened back up, and we're accepting applications, which we had a freeze on for quite some time. And just being a business banker with the company, I would love to offer my help and resources for that as well. And to add to what you were saying, Bank of America is partnering with a lot of what's going on in the neighborhood and the area. I've been working on getting onto that committee and being a part of that change within the Bank of America company. And I'm hoping to be able to secure a position of some sort in the near future, so I can bring really what I've learned from NPU-G and from living in this neighborhood back to Bank of America to continue to help.
All right, great. We have another hand raised, Kiana Jones.
Hey, thank you, Ben. And thank you guys for this presentation. My question is, what are you doing, or what will you do, or are you working with existing CDCs or nonprofits to assist the seniors to age in place in their own homes if they're not interested in moving to a particular facility at this time?
So there's a couple. So yes, in the sense that the homeowner empowerment workshops that we've been doing with our sister organization with BeltLine Partnership is a way to help seniors stay in place. So there's resources that we've connected with partners as it relates to like basic repairs, because we know repairs can sometimes exacerbate a situation, as well as making sure that they are aware of tax exemptions, that kind of thing, in appeals. But that's why I think this plan was important, the sub-area plan, because one of the things it did was it recommended some kind of neighborhood, it recommended a neighborhood stabilization plan. And if something like that were to be adopted, it would help offset the cost. It would serve like a fund to help offset the cost, in addition to education, in addition to, this is a resource to help fix your home. The idea is, if a neighborhood stabilization plan is funded and adopted, is to help really reduce those costs. The West Side Future Fund has something like that. Obviously, they have a smaller geography. We're looking at a whole Beltline. So, but that was a pretty strong recommendation that came out of this plan. And so that's something that, we would elevate to our partners, our cities, for them to figure out how do we make that happen, even if it's just in the most vulnerable areas. But that was a big recommendation from the consultant, and that's something that we also heard from the community.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we also had a question in the chat from Tim Cook. He was asking, he just wanted to verify there are not any specific affordable housing plans in place for sub-area 9 and 10 right now, correct?
So the plans that are in place are what Rodney spoke to, like the plans, when he went through that slide, that's for all of the BeltLine. So they are using that strategy to attack the whole the BeltLine. What the sub-area plans did was came up with additional recommendations, right? So there is a strategy, that's what he went through in the slide for the whole BeltLine. But this plan, the individual plans that the various sub-areas have worked on is identifying additional recommendations specific to the needs of that area that we will elevate up.
So in regards to our voting at the NPU level, would we be able to work on those plans after we vote to approve this legislation, or is that something we need to bind to our approval of the text amendment?
That's a really good question. I think it could be twofold. I think it's something that, you know, I could work with a group of people and come up with some and tease out the specific recommendations a little bit more. Or you can present us with some ideas on how to do that. And we can work together and come to some consensus before the next NPU meeting. That's an option, right? Unless you, I see another Lynette jump on here. That's an option. Or if you make the plan, I guess it could be adopted that way, and with the condition that we want to refine our specific neighborhood recommendations, that could be a recommendation. Beth, do you have any thoughts on that?
So yeah, this is Beth McMillan. And in terms, and please excuse my dog from, you hear barking. My lawn is being cut and he's barking at the lawnmower. But I wanted to say that ABI, you're right that ABI does not have any specific plans for properties in sub areas 9 and 10 to be developed right now for affordable housing. What we try to do though is to be opportunistic, and if properties become available that we can purchase, we are always looking for those opportunities. And whenever we purchase property, I am so sorry about my dog. Whenever we purchase property, there are goals and objectives that ABI has, that a certain percentage of units coming online on properties that ABI owns owns and then may sell, have a certain percentage of affordable housing. Right now, I don't think that we have any ABI/Invest Atlanta properties in these two sub areas.
Well, in Invest Atlanta, we do. I mean, Invest Atlanta does, because they own some property. I mean, not Invest Atlanta. Housing Authority owns property around Washington Park. I mean, not Washington Park, West Side Park. Right. So there's some property that's publicly held around there. The corridor, there may be a small parcel that we own near the corridor, but that's kind of the extent of it. Right now, anyway, I should say.
So therefore, we just wouldn't have any parcel-specific plans for affordable housing right now in these two sub areas. However, if developers come in to develop properties that they own and they need dollars from either Invest Atlanta or ABI Housing Trust Fund, they are then required to have percentage set-asides for affordable housing.
Do you know what those percentages are, or roughly what the range is?
Okay, I'm gonna call on Rodney. I think is 10% at 10% of the units have to be affordable if they are coming in at 80% of area median income, and 15% if they are coming in at 60%. Did I screw that up, Rodney?
So you just reverse it. 10%
Okay,
at
all right.
60, 60 and 15 at 80. But
Okay.
that's at or below. So I want to make sure folks understand that's not, it's at or below. And usually, and what we try to encourage is a mix of incomes, which is part of the recommendations out of these plans, that they're not 100% affordable. In that sense, there's a mix of incomes for these developments.
Can I add, there's a project on Donnelly Hollowell. I don't know if that was a Prestwick property. That's not too far from the Bankhead
Right.
MARTA station. And that was, I want to say that was low income tax credit. And they also got trust fund dollars out of that. And so I do want to make sure it's clear that whether we own property or not in a particular area, our goal is, his slide identified, is to make sure that when development comes in, they are trying to get trust fund dollars. We're trying to give them trust fund dollars to get more affordability, in addition to whatever they're doing through the inclusionary zoning policy.
And I was about to say, that's in addition to
That's
inclusionary.
in addition to.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's see,
Okay.
any other questions? Anybody have anything they want to ask? Anything additional?
Let's see. Mm-mm.
Tim had a comment in the chat.
Let's see. He said, I thought those affordable housing requirements were for any new development in the Beltline overlay, not just the ones receiving
That was
funds.
answered.
Okay.
They just, yeah, they just provided that answer.
Right. Okay.
And I think it's important to mention that the city looked at, not only do we have that inclusionary requirement, but the West Side TAD does as well. So where the Beltline kind of stops, if I can share my screen,
Sure.
just so you can get context. So this area in here, which is English Avenue, Vine City, and and I think it goes all the way to the AUC as well. They also have an inclusionary zoning ordinance as well, which that same set aside. So the idea is that even if you're on this side and closer into the city, in the west side, what we kind of affectionately known as the West Side Future Framework Planning Area, there's also a requirement of inclusionary zoning in that area as well. But again, like Rodney said, that's just one mechanism. There's all the other mechanisms that are in place to reach and achieve the affordability goal.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? So we're running right almost an hour.
Okay.
There's a lot of information to digest. I've received a couple of comments of some members attending that we probably will need to have another zoning committee meeting internally just to discuss how we want to vote on this as an NPU,
Okay.
or at least our recommendation back to the general body of the NPU.
Okay.
So this presentation was wonderful. I really thank you. So at least for NPU-J, I will schedule another zoning committee meeting so that we can collectively, privately, as our NPU, discuss what we want to recommend back to the general body. And then I guess Ms. Reynolds, for your NPU-G, you can proceed accordingly as well.
Yeah, right, man. And I wasn't sure did every, NPU-G persons that are on here, if they got their answers, their questions answered tonight. I know we have Ms. Burr on here, who is our land use zoning, and I was, wanted to know if she had anything that she wanted to make a comment tonight, or we come back together also to vote on, because I know it coming back to us. We deferred it till next month. Well, this month. This
It's
is
the end of the
September.
month. The end of the month. Yep.
Yeah, right. So, but we will be meeting prior, because I think this goes before to the CDP at the 28th. of this month? Okay,
That's correct.
okay.
All right, so I think for tonight, this adjourn our meeting. I thank everyone for joining us. We had a great participation. We had, we're right at 26 people, 27 people, I believe. So with the final counts, that's wonderful.
Well, thank you for having us. If you need us to come to your individual, obviously I respect the fact that you need to kind of confer together. If you want additional comments, or if you have, hey, these are some recommendations we'd like to also have included, please don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll make myself available, me and Rodney.
Great.
There's no Rodney in there too.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you,
Thank
Okay,
everybody.
thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
bye-bye.